Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Advent I Am podcast, Risk and Business. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Paul Oughton. Paul, if you could perhaps introduce yourself to our listeners.
Sure thing. Thanks, Mike. So I'm Paul Oughton. I am a former Advent IM employee, one of Mike's proteges, I'd like to think. I'm currently working as the head of security for Lockheed Martin's UK operations based in Bedfordshire.
We rescued him from the Royal Air Force.
You did, Mike. Yes, thank you very much. Mike gave me my start in I guess industry security, private security outside of the military. I guess this is in some way a little bit of payback.
Right, basically, Advent IM is like a gateway drug for the Royal Air Force. You know,
That's a great way
take
to
them
look
from one uniform, put them in a suit, and then unleash them upon industry.
Upon the world. No. So I have been very fortunate to have known Mike and Ellie for many years and gained a tremendous amount of insight and experience and knowledge from the pair of them. So hopefully today will be some spirited debate on things that we both hold very dear to our hearts, I think. And hopefully I can bring a perspective on how we do things in Lockheed Martin and hopefully a little bit of a perspective on security within defence, particularly, which is what I probably know best of all.
How's the if you like the new world order that we're seeing as we emerge from the pandemic and all the lockdowns and all the changes to working? How's that affecting you within Lockheed? How's it affecting the wider sort of MOD environment?
I think it's brought some really interesting and unique challenges, Mike. I mean, we are an industry that deals with largely classified, highly sensitive, in some cases export controlled information, which is heavily compartmentalized, heavily protected, and that doesn't necessarily fit particularly well with working remotely, working from your spare bedroom or at your kitchen table. So I think it kind of I like to look at this as sort of a bit of a wartime situation, and things adapt and change most quickly during times of conflict. And I remember back in March 2020 when the decision was really made across the UK, and certainly the decision was made within our business to send everyone home. It was too dangerous. The risk was too great to have everyone here on site. The risk of transmission and to keep everyone safe, which was ultimately our priority, was taken by our senior leadership to send everyone home. And we didn't have laptops, we didn't have processes or procedures to work securely or safely from home.
Because you weren't geared up to be a remote working organisation because of the classified nature.
That's it. And everyone here worked on site every day. And that was just the way it was. You know, there was almost a stigma, I think, attached to people who, in inverted commas, work from home. And you know, it was, and I say it in that tone of voice because I think that's how it was looked at. I think it's how it was regarded as an organisation and as an industry in general. And I don't think it was unique to defence. And then all of a sudden, we were thrust into a situation where we had to make this work. And you know, the challenges that brought from a security perspective. Well, how do we know that those people sat at home are not going to let their family members or their foreign national friends come and have a look at the classified material that they're working on, or let them overhear a conversation? How do we carry out a security clearance for someone who we've never met? And it brought lots of challenges, and I'm really proud to say that we really leaned into that as a business, and I think I was very proud of my team for being innovative in how we approached that situation. We could have gone down the line of so many of my security predecessors and folded our arms and said, no, we can't do it. How can we possibly do classified work from home? And we could have closed the business down quite happily if we'd have been that overly draconian, rule-driven, risk-averse security team. We could have stopped recruitment for the business. We could have pretty much ground the business to a halt. But that clearly wasn't the way that we operate. And we looked at the risk. We looked at ways that we could manage that risk. We looked at ways in which we could get someone a security clearance, and we could carry out a security induction, and we could do security briefings, and we could give them access to certain levels of classified information. by working remotely through the use of virtual private networks, through the use of various methods of authentication and new and innovative tools to enable all those things to happen. We're sort of 2.5, nearly 3 years into this now, and I'd say 30% of our workforce are on site 100% of the time. The rest of them work in a very much a hybrid fashion, and we've enabled that. We've supported that. And it's been a really interesting time. It's not been without its challenges, and it's not been without times where we've banged our heads against the brick wall, but we made it happen. We looked at the rules, we looked at what was permissible within our rules, and where we could accept risk in order to create opportunity, and we did that. And that's been some really interesting things, and I think that speaks to the wider defence industry in so much as seeking opportunities, creating avenues for future income generation, for doing things better and more efficiently through accepting risk. And I know this is something that you and I have talked about many times in the past, Mike. So I think that's been a really great example, the pandemic, of where we've adopted that kind of mindset to deliver great effect on behalf of the business and genuinely add value to the business and keep things going, keeping the handle turning, really, because it would have been really easy. And I know many of our peer organisations within defence have really struggled. We never missed a day, we never missed a target, we never failed to deliver to our customers, and I think we're really proud of that fact. We kept people safe, and we kept delivering on all of our commitments. And I know we're probably one of a handful of organisations within our industry that were able to say that we did that. And I'm not speaking in general terms, but I know there are many who didn't weather this anywhere near as well as we did.
Well, I'm just thinking the language you've just used there: draconian, rule-driven, risk-averse.
There you go. It's like buzzword bingo, Mike.
Absolutely. No, but the truth is that so often in the past, you and I have had these conversations, where we come up against that exact culture of being risk-averse, rule-driven, draconian, lack of trust. How can we trust people to be working if we can't see them, let alone trust them to work on classified information if they're not within the fences of our own making? And of course, you and I have a very similar attitude that to get security right, we really need to be starting with individual behaviours, and we need to be managing and owning risk rather than trying to drive out risk. And, draconian, whether it's leadership generally or leadership in security, the draconian approach just isn't fit for purpose for the modern business.
I think one of the things that struck me throughout the pandemic, and that's with regard to how we do business as well as security, is that it brought out the best and the worst in many organisations. So we saw some really unpleasant behaviours towards employees, using security as the sort of catch-all excuse for why they got treated actually quite badly. And I think it speaks to the overall culture of an organisation when a crisis happens, how they treat their people, and how they fight to either enable or disable them to do their jobs. I think we saw an awful lot of really poor behaviour, but we saw some really good examples. And obviously you've just described at Lockheed how it's been handled really, really well.
But you've also highlighted that is in part down to the current leadership, and the predecessors may not have taken the same decisions.
Yeah, and I think that risk acceptance is not necessarily entirely at my level. These are enterprise risks that we're talking about, and I think it speaks to our culture and the leadership, the senior leadership within the organisation, that we're prepared to embrace that risk, with the right communication, with the right understanding, and I saw my role very much as articulating what that risk meant, what the potential impact of that risk to the business could mean if it were to materialize or manifest itself, and giving the senior decision makers within the organization a full and honest appraisal of what this meant to us, to allow them to make an informed and educated decision as to whether that was a risk that they were prepared to tolerate and accept. And I think with that really is a critical part of my role. And I think all security professionals need to have that understanding of how we articulate risk to senior decision makers. And it's something that we do exceptionally badly in many ways. You know, we talk about, if you don't do this, it won't comply with X, Y, or Z policy, or you know, it might mean that Russian paratroopers come climbing over the fence, and all of those things are true, but they're not. It's not a language that the business necessarily understands. And I think the whole term of well, so what, is something that resonates very clearly with me. And my senior leadership asked that question of me. Well, okay, Paul, we're not going to do this, and that introduces some risk, but so what? What does that mean to our business? Well, it actually means that, you know, it's going to cost you £1 million a day. It's going to have this level of reputational impact, which will impact on future revenue generation, and you know, the morale of your staff will be affected, which may lead to attrition, which will impact your business further down the line. Okay, you're talking our language now. You know, I've ticked the box with our operations director because there's impacts from an operational perspective. I've ticked the box with our HR team because there's people impact. Our comms guys get it because there's a reputational aspect to it. Our chief financial officer gets it because there's money involved, and it needs to resonate with them. You know, if all we do is quote policy and quote compliance risk, then you're just banging your head against a brick wall. You're not talking the language that the business understands. And I think that was key to allowing our senior leaders to make informed decisions, because they're qualitative assessments of those risks in language that they understood, which I think historically they would never have had.
And unfortunately, that isn't what we see as the norm across the world of security, is it?
I'd agree, Mike. Yeah, very much so.
We are more likely to see somebody engaging with the board and saying, you've got to do this because that's what the rules say. You've got to do that because that's what the policy says.
Yeah.
And, you know, there is an element within our world, our profession, that naturally come up at everything as a very risk-averse approach, minimizing risk, rather than owning risk in pursuit of a successful outcome. So I think you're right about the communications thing. It's interesting that, you know, even within the professionalization arena, when we look at what they consider to be mandatory skills for a senior security professional, rather than what they class as the nice to haves, communication skills is actually considered to be a nice to have rather than a mandatory requirement.
And yet, if you look at the information security workforce study going back as far as 2017, they were saying, look, we expect you to have technical skills. Technical skills is a given. What we need is for you to be able to communicate with us. So we want information security people with communication skills. So as far as the workforce study is concerned, that is informed by what employers are asking for. Employers are expecting, if you've applied for an information security job, I expect that you have got a lot of technical skills. So therefore, you know, whatever. But
that's almost an employment hygiene.
Yeah,
that you naturally
it is a hygiene. Things, so it's what we're, in terms of what's actually going to push that relationship over the line. It's about the communication. It's not about the technical skills, because, you know, of course you've just applied for this job, so why wouldn't you have them? But I think one of the things that I discovered, I was speaking at a high security event recently, and during the course of my preparation for that speaking event, I was looking at some of the reasons why security professionals are saying that they're finding the threat landscape at the moment incredibly volatile and difficult to manage, you know, expanded attack surfaces and, you know, trying to manage a lot of information that's now being pushed out to public cloud and things like that. There's a whole range of different things with, you know, the underlying rumbling skill shortage that we always find ourselves talking about. One of the things that jumped out at me was a goodly proportion, I can't remember the exact number, but I think we're looking at around 25 or 30% of security professionals saying that they're finding they're having to over-rotate to worry about compliance, and it's taking them away from security. And I just thought, if that's the way we're doing compliance, then we're doing it all wrong, because the idea is supposed to be that the compliance actually supports and helps security. It shouldn't be a massive over-rotation that's actually preventing you from things. So I think there's definitely a conversation to be had around that. And all sorts of things sort of spilled out of that, the massive stacks of, security stacks and stuff that's changing all the time. There are so many different things that were feeding into this, a security relationship with a business, which is actually almost being hamstrung by its own culture and by this ever-evolving set of changing needs. And if we're not using things like compliance to help us to do this, then are we reducing risk? So we may find ourselves having more conversations with our boards about risk and security. But if those conversations are not revealing then reductions in risk, then what are we doing with them? Why are they happening? Why are we doing these things?
I think what we so often see, though, is that compliance is seen as being achieved through the weight of the documentation rather than by the end result.
It's an interesting one.
I mean, Paul, if you think back to the old days of accreditation, when we worked on accreditation projects, and accreditation was definitely judged by the weight of the RMADs, not necessarily by its quality.
How many pages, how many people you could club to death with it. It's really interesting that you kind of talk about that, because I think the shift that I've seen in defence over the last few years is very much a move away from compliance, and all of our regulatory authorities. Maybe a sweeping statement, but they're less concerned about, you must have this fence of this height and this wall of this thickness and this type of lock and this type of CCTV camera, and it's far more about us as an organisation, as an enterprise, understanding our risk and coming up with novel, innovative ways to manage that risk. And so long as we're able to understand that risk effectively and assign mitigations and controls and do that in a demonstrable way that our accreditors can see how we're doing it, can see the value that those things bring, then they're generally happy with that. I mean, at the end of the day, I think for defence, certainly, the world of defence, the Ministry of Defence, the UK PLC needs businesses like us. They are wholly invested in us being successful.
Yeah.
Because the British Army, the Royal Air Force, and the Royal Navy could not operate without industry. We build the tanks, the planes, the bombs, the submarines that enable us to prosecute operations all over the world.
And then put those things back together again once the military break them.
When we break them, or when someone breaks them. So the regulators that oversee our business they're not here to fail us. I think the people, and this may be a slightly contentious one, the people who are here to fail us, I think, are our own security folks in some regard. And that compliance mindset is an easy way to do business.
Yeah.
It's not compliant. It's black and white. To do things in a risk-based way requires it requires a bit of abstract thought. It requires someone to think about the risk. It requires someone to think about the impact and likelihood of that risk, and come up with innovative and interesting, ways to manage that risk. To pick up a document and go, well, when we're not doing that, is not really what I would expect of my team here. And I think it's just a cop out. I think it's just an easy way to do security, because it doesn't require us to think about it. And I think in so very many ways, our business needs us to do it like this in an innovative way. Our regulators are quite happy for us to do that. I think the problem that we have right now is a bunch of security folks sat in the middle who want to help the business. I'm sure they're probably invested in that, but they don't know how to do it. They don't know how to come up with a risk-based approach. So they default back to what they used to know, which is a compliance regime of your fence isn't tall enough and your wall isn't thick enough and we need some more guards. And that just doesn't really float it anymore. I think it turns business off. it fails to capitalize upon the opportunities that our regulatory authorities are giving to us. And we're not serving our businesses properly if we approach it in that way. So, that might be a slightly contentious view, but I think there are some out there who are that old school, who are, leopard can't change its spots kind of attitude of they've been brought up with very much a compliance-based approach to security, a rule-driven approach to security, and they're struggling now to evolve into a world where that is no longer an affordable or acceptable way to do business. So I don't know.
It's that comfort blanket, isn't it? It's the comfort blanket of
rules.
It
is, Mike. Absolutely.
And if you've got a rule book, then you can rule the business. You can keep the business compliant by following the rules. But the reality is that in the modern world, we need to be working to a guiding set of principles, but we also need to allow teams to use their discretion and their professional judgment to decide how they get to a successful outcome by following those guiding principles. And I think you're right. There is still a community out there. They like the black and whiteness of it. They like the rules. They like to have compliance, and compliance is driven by policy, and policy has to be black and white. Because if it's not black and white, that's right. But you see, if policy isn't black and white, how can you tell when people have done the wrong thing? Rather than developing that, individual responsibility for behaviours and attitudes. And it comes back to what Paul was saying there. Now you can give people some, technologies, VPNs, secure laptops, but once you send them out of a secure space and you allow them to work from home, you are largely relying on their own individual behaviours to continue to look after things properly.
So what I'm hearing is, not only do we need them to be good communicators, we also need them to be creative and adaptable. These are not traditional skill sets that have.
They're not traditional skill sets, no. And a lot of people who end up in security, not all, but a lot of people who end up in security come up through the traditional IT route. And IT as a profession generally tends to attract people who are fairly introvert, who like facts, who like order, and from order comes control. And so you end up then with the people who have come from that background rising up, dare I say it, rising up into the security world, and they bring that native safety net that is their natural personality with them. And that doesn't necessarily equate to intuitive. It doesn't necessarily equate to being able to make a leap of logic and be able to see the big picture. And it also often, because of their innate introvertness of them, doesn't translate into being natural communicators or trainers. And yet we're asking them to do all of those things.
And I think the other part of it, to my mind, is a lot of guys, and I include myself in this kind of demographic, for good or for ill, but they're ex-military or they're ex-cops, both of which are organisations that, by their very definition, are very regimented, very, very, no, I wouldn't say restrictive, but there is a way to do it in the military, and that's kind of it. We encourage, clearly, people to be adaptable and flexible, but it's a very regimented organisation, and from a policing perspective, the law is the law is the law, and it is black and white, because that's necessary, points to prove, and the legal framework that supports the judicial system, the legal system, I think engenders that kind of mentality in certain people, and I think you've got a real mix of those kind of three groups of people in this world who, for various reasons, because of their backgrounds, are tarred with that bit of a brush, really, I suppose, which is maybe something that we need to give thought to. And there'll be those who will break out of that mold. There'll be those who will forge their own path and go on and be successful and support their businesses. There'll be others who sadly probably won't, and they'll be the ones who maybe are the dinosaurs that we're kind of focusing this at a little bit, I guess, today, from a slightly critical point of view, perhaps.
It's probably for those same reasons that I wasn't considered to be a good soldier.
So we need a little bit of diversity. It's a different kind of diversity, but we need diversity in security as well, because the diversity of thinking, it sounds like is the thing that is lacking and preventing from security joining the business rather than acting upon it, being seen as a separate entity.
There is a core of groupthink, and part of that groupthink is, and this is the way we've always done security, and we do security through compliance and by having a set of rules that everybody will slavishly follow. And we need to break that groupthink. But also, as we've discussed many a time in the past, as a profession, it is still very much pale, male and stale. And diversity has to come from having different backgrounds, allowing a route into security from different professions that are not the traditional routes into security. It has to come through things like groups like the Women in Security groups and things like that, neurodiversity. And it comes from people like us, people like Paul and myself and yourself, Ellie, from being continuously there at the forefront of saying, just because we've always done it this way doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way to do it now or for the future. And the threat is becoming increasingly agile and adaptive. And we have to become agile and flexible and adaptive if we're going to be successful.
So I think maybe, if we're looking at businesses and looking at the people that we're trying to encourage them to be part of the security resilience of its business. We need to be looking at our business as a whole and identifying people who can be champions for us in different areas of the business, because if we can't suddenly just change out all the people that we have working in security. That wouldn't be fair to anybody.
Right, apart from the fact that we just don't have enough of them at the moment anyway.
There aren't enough anyway, yeah. But identifying people, like myself, who maybe are working, who have started off working in other areas of a business, but have some creative thought around security, have an interest in security, read about it or happy to talk about it, and maybe have some of those missing skills that could be co-opted into helping either spread messaging or becoming, a black belt in a particular department, or, becoming security champions within an organisation, but they're not necessarily security people.
I think I'll throw one into this, because this is something that I know you guys have done in the past, and I think it's a good and great model for businesses to give some thought to. Is like early careers. And we as a business, we adopt a tremendous amount of effort in early careers, particularly around things like STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths, growth areas. And we bring in lots of young people into the organization to learn about what business does in those key areas. We bring in, interns and graduates in HR, in finance, in many of our functional areas. Never once have we had anyone in an early careers position in security. And I know this is something that you guys have done, and I really like that, because I think maybe I'm a little bit biased in this regard, but I don't think there are many people sat in schools and universities today who think, do you know what, when I grow up, I really want to work in security. I want to be a pop star or an astronaut or a Formula One race car driver, but I don't want to work in security. And I think a lot of times people fall into this as a second career or a third career. And is that because it's just that kind of industry? Is it because there are no opportunities to see what this is at an early point in their lives? And we don't do ourselves any favors by selling this industry.
I think it's the latter. Paul. As you know, I've for many years been talking about why we don't have an effective route into the schools. I was very lucky some years back to be able to do some work as part of the STEM Ambassador scheme to go into schools. And for a while, we were doing things like a security takeover day. And so all of the core subjects, but were taught from a security background. And so, history, we talk about the Trojan horse, and then we bring that up to date in terms of malware, or, maths, and we would talk about cryptography. And it was about trying to introduce security as being a staple part of the education, the curriculum. But then beyond that, where do they go next? Because the next The next level of education, by and large, is for people of our age group to go off and do a master's degree. And there's no education route. If you want to be an engineer, you go, you get your A levels, you go to university, you'll study engineering. On your first day of university, you're not sat down and asked, what type of engineer do you want to be? You learn all of the facets of engineering, and you might go on to do electrical engineering or mechanical engineering or structural engineering, but you have to learn to be an engineer first and foremost. And yet we're taking, even right now, we're taking kids at the age of 16 and saying, you're good at maths, you're good at coding, you're going to be a pen tester. And that's the only part of security they'll ever touch. Why don't we have an education package that 16 through to early 20s, individuals can learn about risk, because very few people in security actually have any risk qualifications, let alone experience. You can learn about physical security, people security, IT security, cyber. You can learn about communications. You can learn about business continuity and resilience. You can learn about, and suddenly we've got a curriculum that says at the end of that, you are a well-rounded individual. And now you can start to think about your specialism, and you can go on and specialize in a particular area. And that might be that they go on to be specialists in security education or cyber or technical or pen testing or whatever. That's okay. But, you know, going on your first day of medical college and being told you're going to be a neurosurgeon, they would laugh you out the room if you tried to say that's the way to educate people.
Yeah, so I think we're really missing a trick there, because I mean there's some incredibly talented and capable young people out there, and we're fortunate to have, you know, my team and I, opportunities within our early careers development programs that we do something similar to what you just talked about there, Mike. And I wouldn't say it's as formal or as structured as what you just explained, but you know, we try and embed a security mindset into everyone. They're coming here to be an engineer. That's their passion in life. But you know, everyone needs to have a level of understanding and an appreciation. And I think if we can get that into the non-security professionals, why aren't we doing that for people who maybe have an aptitude for these kind of skills or these kind of areas? And I just think, you know, we are really missing out on some of these really capable people who could be doing some great work within these fields. You know, it just, it frustrates me that we end up with people who, you know, were never really passionate about this. They just kind of wandered through life and found themselves in these kind of jobs when we could and should be nurturing this kind of a mindset. Because when you've got someone as a second or third career, I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but they've got some baggage. They've got some you know, views of life from their previous employment, previous careers, and that can be really good. It can be really great, but it can be a detriment to their future success. And I'm not suggesting that every single person who works in security should be, you know, brought up through a system of different positions, but I think it would add a really interesting dynamic to the industry going forward. People who you could have kind of, and I hate to use this word, but groomed and developed over a period of time to be that all-rounded security professional who understands risk, who can communicate effectively, who can understand business and understand how security interacts with other functions within an organization and at an enterprise level. And that surely has got to be the way that we need to start thinking. You know, tempered and balanced out with experienced folks from other walks of life. But at the minute, I think it's very skewed in one particular area rather than that broader, more diverse.
But, you know, we've been talking about, must be coming on for 10 years now as a profession about the skills deficit, you know, and, you know, I certainly, you know, I think, well, I'm not getting any younger. You know, I'm heading for mid-50s. The retirement finish line is in sight for me now. Where are the replacements for you and I coming from the future? And I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Paul, is that we must be encouraging from all walks of life, through all facets of education, newer, younger, more diverse people into this profession for it to be a profession of the future. And that's got to be combined with having a proper holistic education package that doesn't just rely on somebody in their mid-30s leaving the military or the police with some security background, and now you're a security professional, but actually enables you to go and speak to a 14-year-old at a careers day and say, look, this is a career path, this is a career route. And, you know, we can point to people like you, we can point to people like Chris, we can so many people who have come through our doors over the years who have gone on to be heads of various organizations, because in being able to do that, we can say this isn't just a job, it's a career.
Absolutely, and I think that's maybe, you know, where we fall a little bit flat. That there isn't that obvious kind of trajectory, and those opportunities aren't as clearly articulated. I think there's a lot of that kind of old boy network that still exists. You know, I'll hire that guy because he's an ex-cop, or I'll hire that guy because he was the same cat badge as me in the military, and I think there's a lot of nepotism. And there's still that it will probably die out over time, I dare say, but I think it still permeates a lot of security to one extent or another. And again, for good or for ill, I think in some regard it just limits us and stifles us, and we're not capitalising upon some of those opportunities. And I think it might take people like me and my contemporaries and my peers, and I guess it kind of brings us back to what we were talking about earlier, to take a risk on someone who isn't the same as them, to take a risk on someone who isn't pale, white and stale, or whatever you said earlier, Mike, and who isn't an ex chief inspector, wing commander, colonel in whatever walk of life I know and I'm familiar with and I'm comfortable with. And I think it requires that person, and myself included, to be a little bit more open to risk, because it might not work out when we bring that young fella me lad into the organization, but you know what, it might work really well. And the opportunities that individual brings, the different perspective that individual brings, might be exactly what we're looking for. And I think it's that risk and opportunity, isn't it, that we've kind of talked about a lot today. And I think it is for those people to take a chance and to give that person an opportunity where otherwise, you know, our predecessors may not have done, and to maybe be a little bit more open to some of those potential individuals who bring a different perspective than we historically have done in the past.
Definitely. There will always be risk and uncertainty, but risk and uncertainty shouldn't hold us back from doing the right thing, whether that is for our individual businesses, for the profession as a whole, or for the betterment of society. And I think, you know, we've talked on this podcast many times over the years now. It's about bringing risk and business together, and risk being an enabler for business rather than a blocker for business. And as Paul's just said there, maybe we all need to take a little step back, open ourselves up to taking a risk and thinking about how risk can make things better, not just safer.
Because imagine what you might be able to achieve if you just take a little bit of risk.
Absolutely. So this has been the Advent IM podcast, Risk and Business. If you're young and not pale, male and stale, and you've been listening to this, and you think you might want to have even just a day in the life of to find out what security is all about, then reach out. You can contact us through all our social media groups. And I'm sure, Paul, if we were to bring you along some sparkling young fellow me lad, or girl, I'm sure you'd be more than happy to show them the ropes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so until next time, take care, stay safe, and take a risk.